Some people don't disappear all at once. They fade, not with a dramatic goodbye, not with an argument, not even with a clear reason. One day, you simply realize you haven't heard from them in months. The messages stopped. The invitations ended. Their social media grows quiet. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, they vanish from everyone's life. If you think about it carefully, you might even know someone like this, or perhaps you've been becoming that person yourself. It rarely starts with a decision. No one wakes up one morning and announces to the world that they're going to withdraw from everyone they know. Instead, it begins quietly. A message goes unanswered because you're tired. A gathering is skipped because you're overwhelmed. A phone call feels like too much effort today, so you promise yourself you'll respond tomorrow. Tomorrow comes, but the response never does. Over time, something subtle begins to shift. The world keeps moving. Conversations continue without you. Friendships reorganize themselves, and you drift further away from the lives you once shared. At first, it doesn't even feel like disappearing. It feels like rest. You tell yourself you just need space. Life has been loud lately. Work demands your energy, responsibilities pile up, and social interaction begins to feel less like connection and more like another obligation competing for your attention. Psychologists sometimes describe this shift as a quiet form of emotional withdrawal. Not the dramatic isolation people imagine, but a slow reduction of social engagement that happens when a person begins to feel mentally saturated. The modern world makes this easier than ever. In previous generations, relationships required physical presence. Friends lived nearby. Conversations happened face to face. If you disappeared from people's lives, it was noticeable immediately. Today, technology creates an illusion of connection while quietly allowing distance to grow. You can scroll past someone's life without ever participating in it. You can see updates without speaking. You can observe without belonging. And in that quiet space between observation and participation, some people begin to drift away. But the psychology behind this behavior runs deeper than simple busyness or social fatigue. Often, people who slowly disappear are not rejecting others. They are protecting themselves. Human relationships require emotional energy. Every conversation involves small acts of vulnerability, sharing opinions, responding to expectations, revealing pieces of your inner world. When someone feels emotionally exhausted or uncertain about their place in life, these interactions can start to feel heavy. Imagine carrying questions about your own identity while trying to keep up with the identities others expect from you. The friend who always has advice. The sibling who is supposed to be successful. The person everyone believes is confident and stable. Maintaining those versions of yourself takes effort. So sometimes disappearing becomes the easiest way to escape those expectations, not because you want to hurt anyone, but because silence feels simpler than explaining the confusion inside. There's also another quiet psychological pattern that often plays a role: the fear of being misunderstood. Many people slowly withdraw after realizing that those around them only know a certain version of who they are. Maybe you've changed. Maybe your priorities have shifted. Maybe the person you were 5 years ago no longer exists in the same way, yet every conversation seems to pull you back into that older identity. Friends talk about memories from when you were more outgoing. Family expects the personality they've always known. Even small interactions reinforce a version of you that no longer feels accurate. Over time, a strange discomfort appears. Instead of feeling seen, you feel interpreted. Instead of feeling understood, you feel categorized. And in that moment, disappearing can start to feel like freedom, but the psychology becomes even more complex when we look at emotional overwhelm. When the brain experiences prolonged stress, uncertainty, or disappointment, It often activates protective behaviors designed to reduce stimulation. One of those behaviors is social reduction. The mind quietly begins filtering out interactions that feel unnecessary or draining. At first, this might actually improve your sense of peace. Life becomes quieter. Fewer obligations, fewer conversations, fewer expectations pressing against you. For a while, the silence feels like relief, but slowly something else begins to happen. Human beings are wired for connection. Even the most independent personalities still rely on subtle emotional feedback from others to maintain a sense of belonging. When those connections gradually disappear, the mind enters a strange psychological state. You begin to feel both calmer and lonelier at the same time. This contradiction is difficult to explain, which is why many people who slowly withdraw never talk about it. On the outside, life may appear peaceful. Less drama, less entanglement, less overwhelm. But internally, the silence stretches. Days pass without meaningful conversation. Weeks go by without someone asking how you really are. Eventually, you notice something unsettling. The world seems to function perfectly fine without your presence, not because people don't care, because life always adapts. Friend groups rearrange. New connections form. The spaces you once filled quietly close over, like footprints disappearing from sand after the tide returns. This realization can create a subtle emotional weight. The longer someone remains distant, the harder it becomes to re-enter the social world they left behind. Psychologists call this the return barrier. The mind begins imagining awkward explanations, uncomfortable questions, or the possibility that others might not respond the same way. So instead of reconnecting, the person continues drifting. And what started as a temporary retreat slowly becomes a permanent distance dot in modern culture. This pattern has become surprisingly common. We live in an era that constantly encourages independence, self-focus, and personal growth. These ideas can be healthy, but they also create a subtle narrative that people should solve struggles alone. You are told to work on yourself, to build your own path, to become stronger independently. But growth without connection can slowly turn into isolation. People who disappear are often not antisocial. Many are deeply thoughtful individuals who simply became overwhelmed by the emotional noise of modern life. They retreated to find clarity, peace, or identity. Yet sometimes they stay away longer than they intended. What makes this phenomenon fascinating is that most people never notice it happening while inside it. The withdrawal feels gradual and logical. Each small step away seems reasonable. Only much later, sometimes years later, does the pattern become visible. You suddenly realize how quiet your world has become. The truth is that disappearing rarely comes from one cause. It grows from a mixture of exhaustion, self-reflection, identity shifts, and the subtle pressures of modern life. Each factor alone might not push someone away, but together they create a quiet gravity pulling a person inward. Yet there is another perspective worth considering. Sometimes disappearing is not entirely negative. Distance can help people rediscover parts of themselves buried beneath expectations and noise. Solitude can reveal thoughts that never surface in crowded rooms. It can allow you to hear your own voice again. The danger only appears when silence becomes the only place you feel safe, because the human mind was never designed to exist entirely alone. Even the most introspective person still needs occasional reminders that their presence matters. Perhaps the most powerful realization is this: people rarely disappear because they want to be forgotten. More often, they disappear because they feel unseen. And when someone feels unseen long enough, the world slowly begins to feel like a place where their presence doesn't change much anyway, but the reality is more complicated than that quiet assumption. Every relationship leaves invisible marks. Conversations shape memories, small moments influence emotions, and brief connections alter the course of life in ways neither person fully understands. When someone fades away, their absence does not go unnoticed forever. It simply becomes a quiet mystery in the background of other people's stories. If you recognize parts of yourself in this pattern, it doesn't necessarily mean something is wrong. It may simply mean you reached a point where life became overwhelming, confusing, or emotionally crowded. Stepping back can sometimes be part of understanding who you are becoming, but there is also a gentle reminder hidden inside this pattern. Disappearing is easy. Reappearing takes courage. Sometimes all it takes to reconnect is one small step in the opposite direction, a message, a conversation, a moment of presence. Because while it may feel like the world moved on without you, human connection has a surprising ability to restart where it left off. The real question might not be why people slowly disappear from everyone's life. The deeper question is whether they eventually find their way back. And if this reflection made you pause for a moment and think about your own relationships, your own distance, or someone who quietly faded from your life, perhaps the most meaningful thing you can do right now is simply acknowledge it. Sometimes awareness is the first step toward reconnecting with others and with yourself.